They've insisted that by Friday, the BBC issue a full and fair retraction of the documentary. They apologise immediately and appropriately compensate the US president. Should the BBC pay Trump $1 billion?
If the US president is able to win a case in this country for his reputation having been besmirched because the BBC stupidly edited something to create a different version of a speech that was simply not the one that was given on January 6th, then I think there are obviously consequences.
Is there any element of people putting up the flags because they are trying to intimidate minorities and they're trying to make a statement of you're not welcome here? Even if it's only 1 in every 1,000 people doing it, do you think that exists?
No.
I speak to other poppy sellers and I have heard reports of them being attacked or people walking past and shouting fascist or warmonger at them.
Well, this just goes to show, sadly, where discourse in politics right now is going. And sadly, I'm assuming this is a hard left element of, blue haired or purple haired.
Yeah.
They
always look the same, don't they?
Multiple piercings, living in probably squalor dens in central London.
It's only Tuesday, so here is a fresh shot of Daily Expresso for you. I'm JJ Anisiobi, and I'm joined by my mate and former Tory MP, Jonathan Gullis. Johnny boy, how are you?
I'm right, mate. Cheers. How you doing?
I'm good. Before we started rolling, you and I were just talking about rap battles. Who knew Jonathan Gullis is a fan of grime music?
Pen game. Pen game, yeah.
Amazing.
Shout out to Randy MC.
And Candy Cane, you're a fan of Cane?
Candy and Anoop's last battle was pretty brutal, yeah. If you want to see rap battle at its harshest, tune into that, absolutely.
Amazing. Well, speaking of people who are great with their words, let's start with Donald Trump, because the doctored speech crisis has escalated today with the Trumpster threatening to sue the BBC for $1 billion. Trump accused the broadcaster of trying to interfere in the presidential election. The US president's legal team has now issued a letter to the BBC containing several key demands. A BBC spokesperson said, "We will review the letter and respond directly in due course." The disgraced and now departing Director General Tim Davie spoke outside the BBC this morning, and he said he was proud of the BBC and said they're doing a wonderful job. What? A wonderful job? What are you proud about? Jonathan, this is nonsense. What's he talking about?
The BBC hasn't had much to be proud of, I think, for decades, to be perfectly frank. I mean, obviously, look, I'm a long-standing advocate for scrapping the licence fee altogether, so it won't shock those who are tuning in here to the Daily Expresso that maybe I'm not going to come to the BBC's defence. And Tim Davie, I actually remember having a face-to-face with him at the 1922 Select Committee when I was an MP, and felt that he was quite arrogant, quite flippant, and simply just not willing to take on points that needed to be heard. Look,
sounds like Sadiq Khan, to be honest, mate.
Well, Sadiq Khan's even worse than Tim Davie. I mean, that's another story for another day. But look, with, I think, the BBC, you've seen relentless faults. So, for example, the coverage of the conflicts over in Israel and Gaza. For example, when that hospital atrocity took place, instantly blaming it on IDF soldiers, it then turned out to be completely false. We've seen, obviously, Gary Lineker causing the BBC all sorts of headaches, pushing his far-left politics, and whilst obviously being its highest paid superstar at the BBC. And then look, Brexit for me was the straw that broke the camel's back, essentially. When I used to tune in as someone who was a Brexiteer, I would see people pushing their pro-Remain, pro-second referendum agenda time after time, very rarely hearing true Brexit voices on air, and ultimately made me feel that this institution was determined to drive the political agenda rather than report what the views were in areas like I live now in Stoke-on-Trent, where 73% voted to leave the European Union.
Yeah. I mean, Nigel Trump, Nigel Farage is still the most heard politician on BBC. He's been on Newsnight more than anyone else, and yet he's in the minority party. And this is before Reform had a whopping 5 MPs. So BBC getting accused of the bias, I get it, but they do platform people who...
JJ, they're fascinated with people like Nigel Farage because what they want to do is pillar him at every opportunity to make him some sort of social pariah, which only ever helps drive the vote towards Reform UK. We saw this in 2016 when Donald Trump first ran for election, the continuous free media that they were supplying, where Donald Trump didn't have to spend millions of pounds on advertisement because the media were willing to play his clips, share his tweets, so forth. And I think with Nigel Farage, what they have not understood is outside this cosy M25 London bubble that we're recording from right now, okay, there is a world out there that has seen the high streets be ravaged, deindustrialisation, which is meaning cities losing its identity, the net zero agenda just being a complete and utter farce, and mass migration, both legal and illegal, on a scale that has transformed communities like not seen before. People are sick and tired of a political class and a London elite who simply do not understand them. And that's why Newsnight is fascinated, because Newsnight doesn't understand because people don't get out of London. But they're free to come to Stoke and have a tour whenever they want, and I'll educate them gladly.
Well, here's the demands from Team Trump. They've insisted that by Friday, the BBC issue a full and fair retraction of the documentary. They apologise immediately and appropriately compensate the US president. Should the BBC pay Trump $1 billion?
Well, I think if they've broken libel laws, then there's a consequence for all of us, right, at the end of the day. And I don't think that anyone should begrudge that. At the end of the day, if the US president is able to win a case in this country for his reputation having been besmirched because the BBC stupidly edited something to create a different version of a speech that was simply not the one that was given on January 6th, then I think there are obviously consequences. The sad news is that will fall on British taxpayers' shoulders to have to pay that. The good news, however, is Donald Trump, I think, has sued people for billions before and ends up negotiating down, I think, to $6 million. So whilst that is still an extraordinary amount of money, I don't think it has to be as seismic or totemic as what some people may fear it might be.
Is it possible to be fully impartial these days? Because everyone else, whether it's your favourite newspaper, your favourite channel that's not owned by BBC, there's no impartiality. There is a bias always.
Yeah, look, in the tabloid media and broadsheet media world, we know which papers lean which ways.
Yeah.
And there are certainly now news channels that are becoming more and more apparent who aren't reliant on a taxpayer-funded model where they clearly have a bias in their politics. And I think that's fine, because at the end of the day, it's kind of, I get to choose to tune into those stations, or I can choose to subscribe to those stations, etc. With the BBC, I have no choice. If I want to watch all those other channels, I have to pay the BBC money in order to do that. So I would like to see the BBC have to compete on a stage just like all the other media channels have to. Because as you say, we're now in the world of where people call themselves citizen journalists, right? With social media as well, people straight away videoing live from the scene, passing on opinions. We've seen a lot of dis and misinformation as well be produced, which means that we have to spend hours trying to sort of correct what statements might already be out there. But sadly, certain things have already gone viral and beyond people's control. So I think the BBC just needs to accept it's in an entirely new age of media. And I think what you're doing here, for example, with this podcast, with your newspaper, obviously, as well as obviously the many papers Reach, for example, own in Stoke-on-Trent, the Stoke Sentinel. I think they understand how fast-moving it is. They're able to adapt to the online media world that we now live in. But the BBC just simply is a dinosaur that needs to be extinct.
I think I read one of the critiques about the BBC recently that they try and cater to too many voices. So you go from the news channels, which I think are generally seen around the world as being very good, with the odd doctoring mistake, but then you've got Stacey Solomon and a load of influencers doing rubbish one-off documentaries, or Michael Portillo going on canal boats around the country. I'm not interested in any of that rubbish. I think get rid of all of that. If you're an influencer or a reality TV star, I don't want to see you on BBC.
So I think, for example, the BBC World Service, I think, is actually one of Britain's strongest soft powers that we have.
Yeah.
For me, that should be funded from the Foreign and Commonwealth Department at the end of the day, and we should retain that. I love local radio. I think BBC Radio Stoke, for example, does a fantastic job. Obviously, there's other providers. But I think they do a very good job of covering local news, and I've always felt, in my experience, they have covered local stories from a political perspective very fairly, where everyone's given a voice and everyone's robustly questioned. But as you say, the BBC overall, though, when it was first designed, the licence fee, it was for one channel. We've now got, tens, 20s, hundreds of channels, radio stations. It's gone well beyond the size if it was ever intended to do so. I think the BBC makes some incredible dramas and some incredible documentaries. And I think that if it wasn't a subscription style model, it would be able to hold its own.
Yeah.
Because it's got the brand recognition and it's got the ability to make such dramas and documentaries that win awards, not just here, but in America and elsewhere. But I do think that it should now come down to people having the ability to choose if they want to pay, rather than having to pay just to be able to watch other channels. You know, I'm someone who pays for the BBC licence fee, not because I want to, because my wife, for example, wants to be able to watch certain things on other channels. I would happily just stick to my subscriptions if I could do, but this is the world we live in.
Yeah. Shout out to BBC Radio Stoke, by the way. I interned there in my younger days. Anyway, another day, another public row about our national flags. It's the NHS's turn to wade into this never-ending debate, as one senior trust chief executive said, staff who visit patients at home are sometimes wary that St George's flags can mean no-go zones. The senior manager, who was speaking anonymously, said that Black and Asian staff have been left feeling deliberately intimidated as a result of the flags that were put up in many parts of England during the summer. Jonathan, is there any element of people putting up the flags because they are trying to intimidate minorities and they're trying to make a statement of you're not welcome here? Even if it's only 1 in every 1,000 people doing it, do you think that exists?
No.
Jonathan, we've seen video footage of them putting up union flags outside the Chinese takeaway and telling the Chinese person who owns the takeaway to go home.
There's always going to be
there's 1 in 1,000 then.
Minority of
yes.
morons.
So then there is one. So there is one.
Trying to conflate the people who have been putting up flags on flagpoles and those who have graffitied a local shop disgustingly and disgracefully are two separate things altogether. Those people who desecrated that local business should absolutely be called out and shown for who they are.
Yeah.
The many patriots that I've come across in Stoke-on-Trent, Kidsgrove, who are putting up flags on flagpoles because they simply want to send a message to Westminster that they've been continuously ignored from political parties of all colours, and they feel that this is their only chance to try and get their voices heard, that they want to see their country be allowed to have pride in it. If we go to any country like France, the tricolours are flying all over government buildings. Yeah, I look and we've got the different flags for different pride months, etc., going up all over government buildings, rather than just simply sticking to the flags that should be flying, which is the flag of our United Kingdom and then the flag in this country of England, but in Wales, in Scotland and Northern Ireland, of course, they should be allowed to fly their own flags too.
So then shouldn't we just be saying, yeah, put the flags up on national buildings. If you want to put it on your house, put it on your house. But you can't have people go and put them in the streets on lampposts and things like that. I can't just go in the street. Oh, it's my mum's birthday. Here's some 50th birthday bunting. That's not allowed. So, yes, I agree. We should have them on. I think every school should have the flag flown and a picture of King Charles in there. I think every government building should have the flag. But should we have them in the streets where this is public property? Isn't that against the law?
Well, I've got no issue with it personally. I'm very relaxed about the situation, and I think it looks beautiful. Some of the streets I go down, it makes my heart sing with joy when I see Rule Britannia wants to come to mind, and many other great songs. Jerusalem, that would be a great national anthem for England. I think this is why when I go down those streets, I really understand the sense of pride that people want to feel in their country, and they feel a lack of pride in their country because their political leaders continuously let them down on every turn, whether that be on things like the economy. And of course, when it comes to tackling legal and illegal migration, there's of course an element of it. So like I say, are there always a tiny minority of mindless morons that sadly exist in our society?
Yes.
On all sides.
Yes,
there
are.
are.
Okay.
But to use them to paint the overwhelming 99% of people who are doing this for the right reasons, I think is grossly unfair.
I used to live in your old constituency, and my university would advise us, not just black students at the university, all students. They said, don't go down some of these areas because those people don't like people who are from outside of town. And those areas were areas where they predominantly had union flags in their gardens, and they were not pleasant places to go unless you were, as we called them, townies. So I can understand why those same people are now saying we want to fly the flag even more, but can we at least agree that in terms of social cohesion, do whatever you want on your property and your land? That's your house is your castle, but you can't just go painting. Look, there's a roundabout. Let me go and paint the St George flag on there. And no matter how pretty and how patriotic it makes you feel, you can't start just graffitiing essentially on public property.
But zebra crossings, roundabouts, that is a real safety issue because vehicles are dangerous things, not for just those behind the wheel, but of course those walking alongside the pavements. That's where I would say I'd draw the line compared to those who just simply zip-tied up some flags on flagpoles in their communities. I would say, obviously, I'm very sad to hear that you and others would have felt in parts of Stoke-on-Trent that there were areas where you would feel uncomfortable. Do I think there was an element of fear-mongering by university lecturers? Of course there are. It's a left-wing institutional bias in those organisations. What I would say, however, is I do believe the union flag should be a unifying thing. It should be something that we're all proud to stand under and be part of. I don't see anyone's race, gender, ethnicity, religion. I just see British people, and that's people who have obviously been born and bred in Britain, but also people who have been able to gain British citizenship. And if you can live by our values and by our traditions and then celebrate and enjoy those as much as maybe those who have a dual nationality that also want to celebrate, understandably so, other elements of their history, an Irish person would want to celebrate it as much as maybe a Nigerian person, then that should be allowed and that should be celebrated. But the one thing we should all be proud is to be British. And I think, look, with Stoke-on-Trent, there's undeniably a dark past, right? The BNP did have a foothold, 9, I think, elected city councillors at its peak. In fact, Nick Griffin launched his campaign and manifesto in, I think, 2015 in my old constituency. So I don't deny that, sadly, the BNP were able to thrive off some of the disillusionment. But I don't blame the people. I blame the lack of political leadership. Labour were really the only game in town, as you would know, back in that time. The Conservatives left the field of play. And sadly, when you leave the field of play, you allow those nasty undercurrent elements to take hold of an opportunity and seize it. And sadly, in Stoke's place, the BNP were the only viable alternative for voters if they wanted to send a message to Labour. That's why it's so important that mainstream political parties on the right, like the Reform UK, like the Conservatives, exist and put themselves on the ballot paper so that we can keep those nasty elements at bay as much as possible.
All right. Let's move on to our favourite topic on the show, Rachel Reeves. She was dealt another blow today as new data revealed UK unemployment has reached its highest level in 4 years. That is according to the Office for National Statistics. In what feels like a daily event at the moment for the Chancellor, she would have woken up to more depressing figures. This time, that 5% of eligible workers are unemployed. And I'm sorry to say this, but it would appear to already be Reeves' fault. She presided over a £25 billion rise in employer national insurance contributions. She increased the national living wage in April, and these have led to job cuts and sapped hiring demand. Jonathan, are you employed currently? You lost your job last year?
I lost my job as an MP, but I am employed, yes. I'm running my own little small business and working with an amazing think tank, the Centre for Social Justice as well.
So
cheeky boy.
How is the country in this position now when we have so many people who are able to work but they're not working and unemployment is rising? I spoke to your party leader, Kemi Badenoch, a few weeks ago. She said it was the number of something like 3,000 people a day signing up for universal credit because they're unemployed now, and that number's only going to keep on rising.
Well, look, the Centre for Social Justice has actually done some research released in the last 24 hours that says that if Labour don't take the tough but necessary decisions to trim down the welfare budget, not only go up by north of £25 billion extra from what it already is on, which will, by the way, cost the average taxpayer £700 per person, but we'll also then just see, as you say, more and more people not getting into work, which therefore traps people in long term in a cycle of poverty, doesn't deliver the economic growth, which means we'll have to keep seeing this Labour government pulling the tax lever, squeezing the entrepreneurs, squeezing the successful business people, squeezing the just about managings that, to coin a famous term from 2017, who are ultimately going to have to pick up and shoulder the burden in order to make sure public services can at least just maintain where they are today. Under this Labour government, Rachel Reeves can try and blame, and she is literally trying to blame the Conservatives. Of course, there'll be mistakes. Trying to blame Brexit. I thought we left that back in 2016, certainly in 2019, but here she goes again, rehashing the same arguments where they lost that particular referendum result. I think that's a telling sign. And now trying to blame global affairs. Again, of course, there's the Ukraine war and others, but I don't remember Labour allowing the Conservatives to point to a global pandemic or obviously the war in Ukraine as reasons why we were struggling to deal with the public finances as a legitimate concern at their time. She looked down the barrel of camera after camera after camera, promising people she will not increase their personal income tax, not increase VAT, not increase national insurance for employees, although I think there's a grey area there from what they from what they've tried to spin. And we know we're on the cusp, potentially, of seeing a rise in income tax. It would be such a severe break of a manifesto promise, the size of which I can't recall anything as big as this back until since the Lib Dems broke their pledge to obviously make university free and scrap tuition fees. I remember Nick Clegg on my university campus making that promise to a hall full of university students. I already think Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer are toast. Anyhow, this is the final nail in the coffin for Rachel Reeves. She'll be the one who takes the fall. Keir Starmer will convince himself that he'll be able to ride out, and then after May's local elections, where Labour will be hammered in Wales and Scotland and parts of England where there's council elections, his head will be on the chopping block next.
Well, should we be worried about things more like AI taking jobs? Because I know this is an example of AI, but the tills at supermarkets, they became automated. So I mean, AI and robots, taking over our jobs. We've lost more jobs in hospitality because of robots and AI making it easier and cheaper for employers. So should we be more worried about that? Should we be having, I can't remember what countries, maybe it's Denmark, who've introduced some legislation that says every job that gets given to a robot or AI, you have to, they can only give like a certain percentage away basically before they have to say, no, now you must have another human added to your staff.
So I think with hospitality, it's about 100,000 jobs have gone so far. And we know actually 50,000 of jobs have gone for under 25s. That's because when you make an 18-year-old's hourly wage the same as a 25 or 30-year-old's hourly wage, the business is going to employ the 30-year-old with more experience, already had the relevant training, etc. So there's been a damage done there. Of course, with the jobs tax squeezing, obviously, national insurance on employers. And employers, by the way, are working people despite what Labour try and spin. These are many small, medium-sized businesses that Nigel Farage was talking about yesterday at his own launch of reform for small business. People, many of whom, 1-2 person sized companies, maybe max 10, that are the backbone of our British economy. Those people have been squeezed to death. So, of course, they've had to make tough decisions in order to, do we pass on costs to our customers who are already feeling the pinch themselves in their own pockets, or do I simply trim down the size of my operation behind the scenes?
Yeah.
So those are decisions there. As with AI, I think this is fascinating because this, for me, is the first revolution where white-collar workers are more a threat than blue-collar workers. I think if you've got a future as a sparky or a plumber, your job security is much better than if you are an accountant, because ultimately how many companies are going to be able to probably just have senior directors overseeing AI technology, doing administrative tasks? So I think actually those going into the traditional professional services are going to be a much more greater risk of AI than those, like I say, who are those traditional blue-collar workers. So I think there is a huge conversation that has not happened about what does that mean, because when blue-collar jobs go in places like Stoke-on-Trent, and we've seen the ceramics industry crippled with obviously high energy costs and now labour costs also going up, where they're now moving to China, moving to India, moving to Indonesia, where you can obviously make goods at a much cheaper rate. I've seen the damage that's done to our community. What will Canary Wharf look like once AI fully takes hold? And what will that mean for the restaurants, the shops that surround the area, the people who have converted or built, obviously, apartments around here too? It's going to be very damaging if we don't have a serious conversation about what jobs are needed for the future and how do we train those people in those jobs now, because we're already behind the curve, and the longer we wait, the worse it'll be.
Well, actually, you talk about the ceramics. We are looking to get some mugs for this show.
You
get me a good deal?
I raised it obviously last time I was on here, and I can certainly help you procure some very fine Stoke-on-Trent ceramics mugs, world-leading ceramics. You shouldn't have any of this Chinese rubbish on your tables whatsoever.
Noted. All right, now something a bit more serious. A Ukrainian father of 3 who molested a woman at a busy London train station has been spared jail. Andriy Stenovoitov, 33, was granted asylum in the UK despite being of fighting age in his home country. He launched his attack on the British woman after joining the queue for the female toilets at London Bridge Station just after 7 p.m. on October 26th last year. Now, Stenovoitov, who is a senior policeman back in Ukraine, crept up on the woman from behind, groped her buttocks, put his hand between her legs in front of other scared women and even some children. The victim told the court she was left feeling degraded, humiliated and violated. But Stenovoitov was given only a 12-month community order. So, Jonathan, we've got someone here, an asylum seeker, 33 years old. He's got 3 kids. He could be at home fighting, but he has chosen to come to the UK. He's a senior police officer in the Ukraine, and he brazenly attacks, sexually assaults a woman in front of other women and children. And the judges don't say simply, right, back home you go, mate. They say, all right, 12 months suspended sentence. And by the way, here's your wife and 3 kids coming over as well.
Well, it's disgusting, isn't it? And if you're, for the victim, I feel for her, because ultimately, what justice has she actually really seen? And think about the many women who have been victims of sexual assault. It should just be an automatic custodial sentence. There should be no idea that you could ever get a suspended sentence or a community order.
Yeah.
That's literally like winning the lottery for these predators, because ultimately they don't have to serve time behind bars, where, by the way, other prisoners who know what they're there for will want to target them. So they should therefore be able to live in fear, the criminals, that is, behind bars, so the victims then can walk in being able to breathe the fresh air, knowing that such dangers are off our streets. And I don't care, like you say, if this person's come from Ukraine, he should therefore be facing immediate deportation. I'd actually happily keep his wife and children here because he seems like such a danger.
Yeah.
It's probably a justice for his children to not have such a vile role model in their lives, and for his wife who, God forbid, but who knows, maybe she herself is fearful of him. So ultimately, I think this is a win if we can get him deported, wish him the best of luck on the front line, actually standing up for his country rather than coming over and violating the safety of women and girls in our nation.
Well said. Well bloody said. Now, today is Remembrance Day, and people across the country and throughout the Commonwealth have been observing memorial services and visiting their local cenotaph to pay their respects to the fallen. However, despite the sombre, moving tributes that I've seen over the last couple of days, Poppy volunteers are saying that they are sending fewer than they have in the past, and there are less and less volunteers to help them do this. Now, why do you think people are buying less poppies, Jonathan?
Well, it's heartbreaking, isn't it? Because for me, this is one of the most important days of the year.
Absolutely.
And I say that because my grandfather served in the Royal Marines, albeit obviously in the Suez Crisis, not in World War I or World War II. But my great-great-uncle, who only I think a couple of years ago passed away, was a D-Day veteran.
Wow.
And, was a real role model to me. In fact, my dream was to join the military, but not being able to hear in one ear, I wasn't able to pass the medical. So, for me, this is an important time because it's drilled into me by my family that this is when we come together as a country to remember those men and women, both on the front line, but those working in the factories at home too, to build the ammunition, to build the vehicles, to make the uniforms, to build the weaponry, in order to allow us to have this conversation in the freedom that we enjoy today. And I think the problem in part is that, one, I think the economic circumstances, people are feeling the pinch in their pocket more than ever before. I also do fear that we're at that point now where you and I are probably that last generation that have family members who served, and we had those stories shared down to us. And I think the only war now that people really may know is war in Ukraine. Our generation might still know Iraq and Afghanistan, and the people I used to grow up with in Stratford-on-Avon who lost their lives in those conflicts. And so I think the problem is that people are desensitized because they don't understand, apart from looking back in historical textbooks, seeing black and white film, hearing old speeches, and kind of don't feel connected in the same way, because it's that classic thing of when when time goes by, memory fades. And I think there needs to be a real drive of people of our generation to step up and volunteer and take over from those 70, 80-year-olds sitting at those stations in the cold autumn and winter, selling those poppies to try and raise money for what is a very worthy cause.
So I do actually. You can catch me at Monument train station if you're in London. I stand there with my mate. We sell the poppies, but I speak to other poppy sellers, and I have heard reports of them being attacked or people walking past and shouting fascist or warmonger at them, which is nuts that you're shouting at people who are selling poppies to commemorate and raise money for people who have fought for our freedoms and are being called the fascists.
Well, this just goes to show, sadly, where discourse in politics right now is going. And sadly, I'm assuming this is a hard left element of, blue-haired or purple-haired.
They always look the same, don't they?
Multiple piercings, living in probably squalor dens in central London, who are the very epitome of people that we should be looking and offering an ability to go and live in some sort of communist hellhole. If they want to go to North Korea, if they want to go live under the Chinese Communist Party, indeed, if they want to go and live in Gaza, I'm happy to donate and volunteer for these morons to get out of the country as quickly as possible so we can have true patriots who understand and believe in this nation, understand what our forefathers and foremothers did for us to allow the freedoms that we enjoy today. Because the purple-haired wokerati are, the avocado slamming chai latte slurping elites that terrify me when I come down to central London here. They're so out of touch with reality, and to scream and intimidate people who are just simply trying to raise money for a charity that looks after veterans, either those who are elderly and lonely or those who have obviously suffered life-terminal injuries in many cases on the front line, or indeed family members who have lost loved ones on the front line of service, is truly shocking and disgusting, and those scumbags need calling out.
Well, speaking of charity, on yesterday's episode, I asked you to donate some money to help us out. So our campaign this year is called Give the Gift of Childhood This Christmas, and that's for Whiz Kids. And as I told you yesterday, Whiz Kids, for the first time in 35 years, have had to close their waiting list. They literally give wheelchairs to kids who need it. It gives the kids independence. They've got no more cash. I need you to help us. There'll be a link in the description. Click it, however much you can give. No matter how small it is, please do. Let's raise some cash for those kids. Well, that is it for today's episode. Jonathan, thank you. A very explosive episode today. This is great. Wonderful. Glad to hear you've got a job now as well.
Oh, you're so naughty. You're so naughty every time.
Thank you for watching the Daily Expresso. Join us again tomorrow at the same time. Bye-bye.